insulto sa iyo, Mr. President? Ito ba insulto sa ating institusyon sapagkat ang bawat isa na nagluklok sa atin bilang senador ng Republika ng Pilipinas, nung tayo po ay binoto bilang kinatawan nila as national leaders, Mr. President. Not as district representatives, not as party list representatives, but national leaders. Is this an insult, Mr. President? Is this disenfranchisement, Mr. President? Disenfranchisement of the very sacred right of every Filipino, the right to suffrage, Mr. President. I would like to assure our Filipino people that the Senate, as the last bastion of democracy, does and always will support the people's clamor to institute reforms, whether this would be crafting laws or amending. Ito ba insulto, Mr. President? Ito ba insulto sa iyo, Mr. President? Ito ba insulto sa ating institusyon sapagkat ang bawat isa na nagluklok sa atin bilang senador ng Republika ng Pilipinas, nung tayo po ay binoto bilang kinatawan nila as national leaders, Mr. President. Not as district representatives, not as party list representatives, but national leaders. Is this an insult, Mr. President? Is this disenfranchisement, Mr. President? Disenfranchisement of the very sacred right of every Filipino, the right to suffrage, Mr. President. I would like to assure our Filipino people that the Senate, as the last bastion of democracy, does and always will support the people's clamor to institute reforms, whether this would be crafting laws or amending the Constitution itself. The Senate exists because of the people, and we will continue to push for the uplifting of the life of every Filipino. In the event that our people would come to truly believe that it is only through their own efforts that they can rewrite the letters of the Constitution to a form and content that they think embodies their ideals, I am sure that the Senate will be the first to support. However, the Senate will also be the first to condemn if the right to people's initiative is being bastardized by enterprising politicians. The Senate will not allow and will therefore condemn any form of threat, coercion, or bribery that compromises the future of our country and our people.
Bilang ako po ay chairman ng Committee ng Amendments and Revision, nais ko pong ipaalam sa inyo, Ginoong Pangulo, na ako po mismo ay may sarili ding People's Initiative. Iyan po ay aking isinusulong at nais ko pong ipaalam sa lahat na wala pong sa konstitusyon natin, Article 70, napakaliwanag, na meron po talagang tatlong moda. At yan ng Constitutional Assembly, CONCON, at People's Initiative. Ang nais ko lamang pong linawin, mahal na Ginoong Pangulo, na wala pong masama sa People's Initiative. Wala. Yan po ay kasama sa konstitusyon at yan po ay pinalalakas. Katulad po ng sinabi ni Senator Bato de la Rosa, ito po ay esensya ng ating demokrasya.
Our chamber will be led in prayer by our distinguished colleague, Senator Robin Hood Padilla.
A'udhu billahi minasyaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Walhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Bismillahi wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillahi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Mga mahal kong kapatid, tayo po ay manalangin sa ating nag-iisang Panginoon Diyos. Diyos po ng mga Muslim, Kristiyano, Hudyo. Tayo pong lahat ay nanggaling kay Propeta Abraham. At mula po sa kanya, dumating po ang mga propeta, si Moses, si Ismael, Isaac, Jesus, Muhammad. Ito pong pagkakataon na ito, tayo po ay yumuko, tayo po ay pumikit, tayo po ay lumapit sa nag-iisang Diyos. O Panginoon namin, na kayo po ang lumikha sa langit at lupa. kami po ay nananalangin. Kami po muli ay lumuluhod, nagpapatira pa sa mga nangyayari po sa aming kapaligiran. Katulad po ng nangyayari ngayon sa bansang Palestina, Israel, mga Muslim, Hudyo, Kristiyano. Sila po ay nasa loob ng isang digmaan na hindi po namin maintindihan kung saan po nanggagaling ang mga karahasan na ito na nabiging biktima ang mga bata, matanda. Panginoon namin, patawarin niyo po kami sa aming pagmamalabis, sa aming mga ginagawang hindi kanais-nais. Hinihingi po namin na tulungan niyo po kami, na bigyan kami ng talino, ng lakas, para mapigilan po namin sa aming abot na makakaya ang karahasan na ito at magkaroon po ng tigil putukan, magkaroon po ng kapayapaan, magkaroon po ng pagkakaisa, pagkakaintindihan. Dahil Panginoon namin, ito pong kaguluhan na ito kapag lumaki, baka hindi po namin mapigil ito at ito po ay umabot sa aming bansa. At magkaroon po ito ng hindi magandang epekto sa mga kababayan po namin, sa 80% ng aming mga kababayan na sa hanggang ngayon ay naghihikahos sa kahirapan. Panginoon, nagmamakaawa po kami dahil kayo po ang tunay na mapagpala at mahabagin. Tulungan niyo po kami. Kayo lamang po ang makapagbibigay sa amin ng tulong, wala ng iba. Panginoon, kami pong lahat, Muslim, Kristiyano, Hudyo, kami pong lahat ay nananampalataya sa inyo. Kami pong lahat ay umaasa sa tulong ninyo. Amin. Allahu Akbar.
May I just be allowed to make a short manifestation, Mr. President?
Yes, please.
Thank you,
go
Mr.
ahead,
President.
Leader.
Mr. President, in commemoration of the 125th anniversary of the First Philippine Republic, which is being celebrated today, January 23, nais ko lang ipahayag, Ginoong Pangulo, noong Enero, ika-1 ng Enero, taong 1897, 2 taon bago pasinayaan ang unang republika sa simbahan ng Barasuing Church sa Malolos noong 1899, naganap po ang pinakamadugong digmaan sa kasaysayan ng Pilipinas, ang labanan sa Kakarong Sili sa Pandi, Bulacan. Mahigit 1,200 na mga katipunerong Bulakenyo ang minasakir ng mga Kastila. Sa dami po ng dugong dumanak sa digmaang iyon sa Kakarong de Sili, bumaha ng dugo at umabot pa daw po ang taas nito hanggang sa bukong-bukong. Bilang isang Bulakenyo, Ginoong Pangulo, naniniwala po ako na ito ang dugong nagpaalab at nagpatindi ng adhikain, hindi lamang ng mga revolusyonaryo, kundi ng lahat ng mga Pilipino para isulong ang independensya at itatag ang unang republika, ang unang malayang pamahalaan sa buong Asya. Ang isa po sa halos 6,000 mga revolusyonaryong Bulakenyo na nakipaglaban sa Kakarong de Sili ay ang aming ninuno na si Canuto Villanueva bilang Supremo, katuwang si Maestrong Sebio bilang Kapitan General. Ginoong Pangulo, ngayong araw po na ito ng pagpapasinaya sa unang republika, hinahamon tayong muli na bumangon at magbalik tanaw sa kasaysayan. At lubos ang paghanga ko po sa inyo, Ginoong Pangulo, Senate President Zubiri, dahil matapang niyo pong ibinahagi ang ilan sa mga aral na ito ng ating kasaysayan kaninang umaga sa dambana ng Barasuing Church. Kapakanan ng bayan bago ang sarili. Tulad ng inyong sinabi, Senate President Zubiri, hindi inisip ng mga nagsulat ng Malolos Constitution ang pansarili nilang kapakanan. Hindi nila sinamantala ang kanilang posisyon bilang tagapagbalangkas ng ating unang konstitusyon. I couldn't agree with you, Mr. President, when you said if the members of the Malolos Congress had wanted, they could have constitutionalized themselves into limitless power without regard for the voice of the people. As framers of the first constitution, no one could have stopped them. Instead, they chose for the Malolos Republic to be an uncompromising stand for freedom and independence. Malinaw po, Ginoong Pangulo, at alam kong narinig ng lahat ang inyong panawagan kanina. Mr. President, yung binanggit niyo pong anumang pagbabago sa ating saligang batas at dapat dumaan sa malalim na pag-aaral at konsiderasyon at hindi dapat mag-ugat ng mga makasariling mga motibo. Ilang beses na po akong naglabas-masok sa simbahan ng Barasuing, Mr. President, at aaminin ko po sa inyo na walang isang beses na ako'y hindi kinilabutan, lalo na po kapag nababasa ko yung historical marker kung saan nakasulat, dito, pinagtibay ang konstitusyon de Malolos. Mr. President, the Barasuing Church remains not only a piece or a place of worship, but the cradle of freedom and the shrine of democracy. After 125 years, we have not only preserved our republic, but we have also nurtured the flourishing of democracy within our institutions, particularly here at the People's Senate. In April 2018, Republic Act number 11014 was enacted, declaring January 23 of every year a special working holiday in the entire country to commemorate the declaration of the first Philippine Republic. A simple but very meaningful measure co-authored by this representation. Bilang isang Bulakenyo, muli Ginoong Pangulo, at bilang isang Pilipino, bilang empleyado dito sa Senado, hindi po ako magsasawang balik-balikan ang barasuin. Aalalahanin ang mga ninuno nating nagbuwis ng buhay, ang tagumpay ng Malolos Congress, at ipaglaban ang pamana nito sa lahing Pilipino. Ang unang republika, ang ating demokrasya, at lagit-lagi unahin, higit sa lahat, ang interes ng mamamayang Pilipino. Mabuhay ang unang republika, mga Pilipinas, mabuhay ang Pilipinas. May God bless us all.
Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move that we proceed with the privileged speech and recognize the distinguished gentleman from Valenzuela, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, to deliver his speech.
Our distinguished colleague from the city of Valenzuela, no other than Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, chairman of the EDCOM 2.
Thank
Please
you,
recognize.
thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. In December 2019, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development released a report from the 2018 cycle of the Program for International Student Assessment, which the Philippines joined for the first time. Headlines at the time consistently highlighted a distressing reality. The Philippines ranked lowest in reading, math, and science in the 2018 study. This ignited a collective acknowledgement of the issues within our education system. The subsequent response from Congress, culminating in the passage of Republic Act number 11899, marked the beginning of a transformative journey. A year ago today, the Second Congressional Commission on Education convened to address a pressing question. Is there truly an education crisis in our country? Moreover, beyond validation, we aim to unearth the origins and persistence of this crisis. Collaborating with the nation's foremost minds, universities, and education leaders, we sought comprehensive insights to pave the way for effective solutions. Today, I stand before you to share the initial findings of a year spent unraveling the complexities of our educational landscape. These preliminary discoveries, focusing on 12 of our 28 priority areas, result from extensive data analysis and deliberations, 19 hearings, 12 focus group discussions, and 23 site visits across the nation. As we delve deeper, we anticipate a richer understanding of the challenges we face, enabling us to craft enduring solutions. We begin where the education journey starts, in early childhood. Studies show that the Philippines has among the highest prevalence of under 5 stunting in the world. And while our laws and programs adhere to global standards, implementation has been fragmented, coverage remains low, and targeting has been weak. During the critical period of cognitive development, lack of nourishment for both the mother and the child, especially in the first 1,000 days of life, possess irreversible consequences on the child's growth, learning trajectory, and life outcomes. On early childhood education, despite RA 6972 of 1990 requiring each barangay to have at least one daycare center, this remains inequitable. A study by Philippine Institute for Development Studies show that only 36% of barangays have daycares or child development centers. Disparities are also acute. In first-class municipalities, there are up to 6 centers for every 10,000 children aged 3 to 4. In sixth-class municipalities, this number drops to only 1 to 2 centers for every 10,000 children. Another challenge, those who run these centers, the workers and teachers, lack the necessary training in early childhood education. Barely half of them have college degrees. 17% have only a high school diploma, and staggering few have formal training in ECE. Since 2005, higher education institutions nationwide offering ECE teaching program have had only 3,903 graduates, less than 4,000 graduates in almost 20 years, or barely 80 annually, a number that is hardly enough to cover the needs of our population. The vast majority of these workers and teachers also hold non-permanent positions and receive an average monthly wage of only 5,000 pesos. Worse, 19% of them, about 1 in 5, receive an honorarium of only 1,000 pesos per month. The learning crisis is just as evident in basic education. While our basic education system boasts a net enrollment rate close to 90%, the results of various international and national assessments indicate that students are not learning effectively while in school. One of the main cracks in the system is a lack of efficient and high-quality learning resources, especially textbooks. Each year, we allocate over 1 billion pesos for textbook procurement, believing that children learn best when they have access to printed materials for both structured and self-directed learning. However, EDCOM2's review reveals that over the past decade, the government has successfully procured only 27 textbook titles for grades 1 to 10 students, actually utilizing less than 1 billion pesos of the allocated 12.6 billion pesos for textbooks from fiscal year 2018 to 2022. Challenges in procurement have also affected our ability to measure the learning of art students. On paper, despite the many assessments like the National Achievement Test that are supposed to guide us in developing and adjusting interventions for the basic education sector, EDCOM's analysis show that out of the 27 key stage assessments scheduled from 2016 to 2023, 13 were administered late and 11 were not administered at all. This lack of systems-level assessment data has led stakeholders to implement additional tests, creating a system of redundant assessments with varying quality, producing results that are neither comparable nor generalizable at the national level, and ultimately burdening teachers who sacrifice instruction time to administer tests without getting meaningful results. The COVID-19 pandemic led to extended school closures, affected learning and well-being. While many countries closed schools for about 79 days, the Philippines had closures lasting over a year. Despite efforts from teachers, students, and parents to adapt to distance learning, the harm to children's learning and overall well-being has been profound. Schools are now on track to address this learning loss through the National Learning Recovery Program, but as EDCOM2 discovered in consultations, interventions such as learning camps during school year breaks may not be reaching the learners who need the remediation most due to costs associated with extending extra days in school. We must strive to make learning equitable and target support those who need it the most. Higher education paints a picture of increased enrollment but heightened dropout rates. The Commission on Higher Education data shows attrition rates were at an alarming 41% in 2020. Access also remains elusive for the economically disadvantaged. Despite budget allocation, inequities persist, and the intended beneficiaries of subsidy programs deviate from their original purpose. Enrollment among the poorest students has only incrementally increased from 1.7% in 1999 to 6.1% in 2019. To further drive the point regarding inequity in access, most of those who have availed of tertiary education subsidy lie outside those whom we consider the poorest of the poor, clearly deviating from the intent of the Universal Access to Quality Education Law. In 2018, listahanan beneficiaries in the subsidy program comprised 74% of enrollees. In 2022, this share dropped to 31%, with the bulk of grantees coming from municipalities without state universities and local universities and colleges. In teacher education, disconcerting passing rates in licensure examinations persist, raising questions about the continued operation of underperforming institutions. Between 2009 to 2023, the average passing rate in the licensure examinations for elementary, which is 33%, and secondary, which is 40%, has been dismal compared to those in other professions. EDCOM also found that between 2012 and 2022, 77 HEIs offering Bachelor of Elementary Education and 105 HEIs offering Bachelor and Secondary Education continued to operate despite having consistently zero passing rates in the LET. Against this backdrop, the strengthened Teacher Education Council remains unrealized 2 years after we passed the law. During our consultations across the country, teachers consistently conveyed a recurring message. They are requesting our help, emphasizing their desire to focus on teaching rather than being assigned additional tasks. But additional tasks such as canteen management, filling up forms for the central office, and serving as 4Ps or disaster reduction, risk reduction, and management coordinators, 50 plus in all based on DepEd's inventory, pull them out of the classrooms and away from their students. While new administrative officers are being hired, 5,000 per year, starting in 2020, This one officer is shared by multiple schools and has limited impact against the long list of ancillary and administrative tasks we have asked our teachers to take on. Some since 1925, as reported in the Monroe Survey. To compound teachers' frustrations, career advancement and professional development opportunities also remain limited. Turning our focus to technical vocational education, we saw increased participation enabled by the rise in TVET institutions and expanded subsidies and scholarship provided by the government. The majority of the enrollees, however, 3.7 million between 2014 and 2022, were in community-based training programs. Unfortunately, such programs are typically outside the purview of training regulations and thus do not lead to assessment and certification for its graduates, which are in essence the very proof of their acquired skills. In fact, TESDA's 2,203 programs, only 315 or less than 15% led to a national certification. This underscores a critical gap in aligning skills acquisition with recognized standards, hindering the advancement of our large but mostly uncertified skilled workforce. We also note the maze of policies governing enterprise-based training, with 6 different government policies and programs that have since contributed confusion on the ground. This is even more concerning considering that the majority of our skilling programs, 64%, are for NC1 and NC2 levels, which yield only incremental improvements in income to our learners after training. Industry participation remains limited and prohibitive, with many stakeholders lamenting the voluminous paperwork, rigid but obsolete requirements, and long processing times of TESDA. The resounding message is crystal clear. We must invest in higher-level qualifications and dynamic demands of the labor market. This demands the bureaucratic systems evolve to be more agile to respond to the rapidly changing needs of industry. At the root of this are profound challenges in governance and finance. We found that staffing levels in education agencies have not kept pace with their growing responsibilities. For example, between 2013 to 2023, CHED's budget increased by 633%, but the agency's staffing complement only increased from 543 to 666, making the agency dependent on 752 contract of service and job order personnel. Meanwhile, TESDA's provincial offices have only 7 to 12 personnel providing a range of services, including the supervision of 17 to 88 public and private TVIS. The first EDCOM envisioned the establishment of a National Coordinating Council for Education, a high-level coordinating body to ensure synergy among DepEd, CHED, and TESDA. This vision was not achieved. On the other hand, we have 68 interagency bodies working on a broad range of concerns, such as impracticable situation yields a misalignment at the system, agency, and individual levels. And while there has been substantial growth in education funding in the past decade, the need to sustain increased investments while ensuring absorptive capacity and the strategic resourcing of what can actually support learning needs to be enhanced. We must also see these issues at school level, where during our consultations, principals have lamented that their meager school maintenance and operating expenses are easily depleted by electricity bills, in some areas consuming up to 70%. This situation is further exacerbated by inequities in the Special Education Fund. The median SEF income of municipalities is at 1.6 million pesos, or a mere 4% of the median SEF income of cities and provinces. Meanwhile, first income class municipalities have 68 times more SEF compared to the sixth income class peers. With a growing list of expenditures, among them nutrition and early childhood education being charged against the SEF, it is critical that we revisit this policy to ensure equitable resourcing so that no child is left behind. Suffice to say that these are headlines, which conclude thus: a system is defined as a regularly interacting or interdependent group of items forming a united whole. By this standard, the education system in the Philippines struggles to meet the criteria of a system. By the standards of the 1987 Constitution as well, it is short of a complete, adequate, and integrated system of education. Instead, agencies, bureaus, and offices have focused, often too faithfully, just on their respective mandates and targets independent of one another. This is evident in the findings uncovered by the Commission in its first year. Ultimately, this has led to the miseducation or poorly delivered education of Filipino learners, bringing about a profound education crisis, as has been laid bare by both national and international assessments, issues that the Commission seeks to squarely address. The headlines we've shared offer just a glimpse into the comprehensive findings within the 400-plus pages of the EDCOM's inaugural year report. Within these pages is a measured examination of the challenges permeating our schools, from the context and roots to potential pathways forward. While these ways forward seems difficult to sparse from the sheer volume of findings, it is upon us to move from piecemeal reform to a strategic and united approach that aspires to not just find short-term solutions to the challenges we have uncovered, but to ultimately build a long-term and genuine education system. This requires a shift from a mindset that looks narrowly at our own individual targets to one that understands our work is actually interdependent of each other, from plans that are perfect on paper to those that are doable in practice. As we embark on the remaining 2 years of EDCOM, our resolve is even stronger. This year, we will examine the remaining 16 priorities addressing concerns from early childhood to higher education, including issues such as the shortage in classrooms, bullying, and research productivity. That said, we are conscious that our ultimate goal is larger than resolving issues that are symptomatic of its root cause: the need to build a future-proof system of education that will not only be effective today, but is able to evolve with the needs of the future. After all, as we realize in a review of the first EDCOM report in the 1990s, most of these issues we face today have persisted for decades, often spanning multiple administrations and complicated by overlapping government policies. We carry forward the momentum gained in our first year, a momentum fueled not just by the tireless work of our advisory council and standing committee members and our colleagues in Congress, but the solidarity of all those impassioned about Philippine education. Teachers, parents, our partners in DepEd, CHED, and TESDA, as well as advocates and stakeholders at every level who remain optimistic that we can turn things around. Solidarity in various forms sustains our collective endeavor, whether in terms of openness and honesty, understanding that we seek clarity rather than placing blame, or collaboration as we navigate the intricacies of government issues that require strong political will. The foundational step towards solutions is a microscopic examination of the problem, understanding where obstacles lie in the way of genuine reform, one that we have strived to accomplish in our one-year report. This is the role of EDCOM, translating this clarity into actionable points, so together we can work towards a nation where each learner has access to quality education. And let me personally thank the members of the Senate who are part of the commission. Let me thank our majority floor leader, Senator Joel Villanueva, who has been tirelessly attending our meetings, our FGDs, Senator Sani Angara, Senator Pia Cayetano, and also Senator Chis Escudero. Thank you, and let us work together in the remaining 2 years of our EDCOM for a brighter future for the Philippine education. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Senator Gatchalian. Congratulations to your 1 year anniversary. You forget the guy who signs your checks. That's us.
Of course, Mr. President, we are forever grateful
Just kidding.
with
I
your
was just
support to the EDCOM 2. And as part of the EDCOM 2, we'd like to convey our sincerest thanks and gratitude for all your support, Mr. President. May I just be allowed, Mr. President, to just insert into the records my short manifestation together with Senator Sani Angara as one of the commissioners. And if Senator Pia, I think Senator Pia Cayetano, one of the commissioners of EDCOM 2, is seeking the floor. I move that she be recognized,
Yes,
Mr.
we'd
President.
like to recognize a distinguished, honorable female chairperson of the Blue Ribbon Committee. History for this 106 years of the Senate. No other than 107th years of the Senate. No other than Senator Pia Cayetano is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Haba po ng introduction ninyo, but maraming salamat. Pati po dito sa likod ko, may observation pa sila sa kulay daw ng pantalon ko. Anyway, Mr. President, I join our colleague, the chairman of EDCOM, and would like to, well, like the Majority Floor Leader already did earlier, acknowledge the presence of our Advisory Council members and Standing Committee members. Everyone, Mr. President, works so hard. I need to put this on record. We had more meetings than we were capable physically of attending because obviously as senators, we also had other hearings to attend to. But obviously the members also had other commitments to attend to, but I believe almost everybody was present all the time. And we do have a 300 plus page report to present through the hard work led by our Executive Director, Mark Caroli. Thank you so much, Mark. I was looking for you. Oh, there you are. Okay. So the details of the report of our chairman are here. These are the kind of books I love because honestly, I grew up as a childhood reader. Ito yung book na maraming picture. Okay? So I'm not embarrassed to admit that I love books with pictures, very good graphics. It's just more detailed than the exhibit outside. And the chairman gave us a summary of the one-year findings, but I'd like to just zone in on one thing that he already mentioned. And this is because of my work as the vice chairman of the Committee on Finance in charge of the budget of DepEd. So the chairman earlier had shown slides and it is also available outside. I encourage all of you here, our guests, to take a look at it. It showed there's a whole stand there that says, since 2012, only 27 textbooks have been procured for grade 1 to 10. I would like you to all visualize this, no? Many of us are parents. One of the complaints in private school parents is yung bag ng anak nila, hindi na kayang kargahin. Siguro grade 1, 10 libro. So grade 2, 20 na. Grade 3, 30 na yon. So ibig sabihin, in private schools, yung 30 books na yon, covered yon in 3 years at least. And here we are, looking at the data, that only 27 textbooks have been procured for grade 1 to 10 since 2012. Digest that, Mr. President. The report, furthermore, has a very visual graphic that shows us in red are the grade levels that do not have books in various subjects. Imagine, Mr. President, grade 1, no books. In English, Araling Panlipunan. Siyempre yung picture ng staff ko malabo, so hindi ko na mabasa yung ibang subject. But suffice it to say, lahat ng subject ng grade 1, red, walang textbook. Grade 2, red din lahat, walang textbook. So magtataka pa ba tayo kung bakit nahihirapan magbasa? Magtataka ba tayo na ang pangarap ng bawat magulang, pag nagkakonting dagdag na pera, ilipat sa private school? And yet, this does not in any way diminish the contributions of our teachers, of our superintendents, of our principals. It is a shortcoming in the system because kami naman po sa Kongreso, well, at least sa Senate, I will now only speak on behalf of the Senate, Mr. President. We have always provided for this budget. In fact, a total, and this is coming out of the report, a total of 12.6 billion has been allocated for textbooks and other instructional materials, but only 4.5 billion or 35% has been obligated. And 952 million, barely a billion, has been disbursed. Bakit? Bakit nakaupo lang yung pera? Bakit hindi na ibibili? Now, there's so many things that we need to tackle, Mr. President. Of course, we have had these detailed discussions in EDCOM, but it is not enough. And so as I stood there in my blue pants, which have been noticed by my colleagues, Senator Angara, the chairman of finance, and the chairman of EDCOM, and Majority Floor Leader had just stepped out, so I don't know if you heard this conversation. We were talking already, and they were saying, oh, baka dapat pang blue ribbon na yan. Kasi, where does the money go? Where are the books? And if it's a failure in the system, well, the money still has to be accounted for. It is a failure of delivering education to our children, Mr. President. And so, without having consulted my team, oh, there you go. Thank you for sharing that. So, I'll just show it again once more for the public. Lahat ng red, ibig sabihin ng red, no textbook. So, if you notice, the blue is underwhelmingly in the visual, no, red talaga yung no textbook. Can you imagine grade 1 to 3 no textbook? I mean, obviously you will find some schools that have, and the reason for that, as we were also discussing, is because yung LGU nagsi-step up at ginagamit yung pondo nila. Anyway, Mr. President, I just wanted to highlight that. I wanted people to know that We have a working Senate that has been diligently looking into these issues. But gusto naman namin na we also find solutions bago naman mag-graduate ang ating chairman of the Committee on Finance, ang ating chairman of Basic Education. We want to be able to find solutions while kaya pa natin gamitin no, yung input nila and yung passion nila to find to solve these problems. So there's going to be much more said and studied on all this, Mr. President. But for now, I'm proud to be a member of EDCOM. And again, I speak on behalf of the commissioners. We thank all the people here and not here, and even our international partners for helping us improve and really address the problems, the miseducation, the failed system of the Philippine education. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Senator.
Mr. President. I cannot agree more with the statements made by our new chairperson of the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee. Mr. President, Senator Sani Angara is also one of the commissioners of EDCOM 2. And let me say, Mr. President, yung EDCOM 1, pinangunahan ng kanyang dakilang ama, ang ating idolo, ating mentor, Senator Edgardo Angara, Mr. President. So I move that we recognize Senator Sani Angara, Mr. President.
Yes, a distinguished colleague from the province of Aurora, no other than the chairman of the Committee on Finance, Senator Sani Angara is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader, dear colleagues. I just want to echo the report. I want to support the report made by our very hardworking chairperson of Basic Education and the EDCOM, Senator Sherwin, as well as by our Senior Vice Chair of the Finance Committee and now first woman chair of the Blue Ribbon, Sen Pia, in their remarks earlier. Just support them and as well as their recommendations, and as well as echo their thanks to our very capable and hardworking EDCOM staff led by Carol Markey and of course his pool of experts who range from former commissioners, former and current presidents of universities, experts in various fields who really have devoted their time for no other reason than just love of country and their wish to see the next generation succeed, Mr. President. And I just want to add that the thanks to our 4 commissioners, now 5 with Senator, the Minority Leader, that we have acted already on the recommendations made by EDCOM. Unlike before where we would wait for the full report until we act. But I think that there are a lot, the problems are so numerous that and so urgent. So we've, among the amendments recommended by our chair, Sen Win, who's also a vice chair of the Finance Committee, and Sen Pia, who is the chair of the subcom on DepEd and other very important institutions. So their recommendations have been carried in the 2024 budget, which includes the certification of graduates, because one reason for the non-employment of our vocational strand graduates was the non-certification or not having the accreditation. So hindi po sila hinahire ng mga employers. Yun yung pangako natin sa mga magulang na kailangan makatapos ng additional 2 years para hindi na kailangan magkolehiyo. Walang na-hire dahil wala yung certification. That is finally now in the budget for the first time after over a decade. Mr. President, nagdagdag tayo ng pondo dun sa nutrition because of the finding that of stunting and malnutrition. There's funds for the hiring of assessors, research funds, the development of training manuals for inclusive education, for workshops for our master teachers, for a summit for the development of a concept note for the local school boards, among many others, Mr. President. I just wanted to place that on record that the work of the EDCOM has been so good and outstanding that it has served as a basis and a spring for this chamber to spring into action and fund the initiatives so that this report is not just a report, but it's actually a set of reforms that has already, as we speak, is already being implemented. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader, and thank you to our hardworking chair and commissioners.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you. Mr. President, may I just put into the records that this is not actually a privileged speech. As I earlier mentioned, I spoke with our chairperson, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian. This is a report pursuant to Section 7, letter L of Republic Act number 11899 or the Second Congressional Commission on Education Act, the EDCOM 2. It states there that EDCOM 2 shall submit periodic reports to Congress. And let me also take this opportunity once again, Mr. President, to thank our Executive Director, Carol Mark, the staff of EDCOM 2, Attorney Joseph Estrada, the EDCOM Advisory Council, and those who are present here today, specifically, Mr. President, Her Excellency HKU, Australian Ambassador to the Philippines, His Excellency Lai Tai Bin, the Vietnamese Ambassador to the Philippines, and Ms. Rebecca Eubanks and Ms. Lucelle Chen of USA. They are our Education Commission partners. And so again, we express our deepest gratitude and thanks to these individuals, Mr. President. Mr. President, may I ask for a minute suspension to allow our guests and even the EDCOM commissioners, Mr. President, to present to you the EDCOM 2 report, Mr. President. So,
Yes, before I suspend session, I'd just like to thank all our partners. You know, we in government, we're expected to do our job, but the partners such as the Vietnamese ambassador together with the Australian ambassador, USAID, and all the NGOs that are here supporting us, we thank you. As you can see, it's a yeoman's job trying to fill the gaps in our different social programs for our people. And any help that we can get is very welcome help indeed, particularly in the education sector. So we thank you all for your support. And of course, the staff of EDCOM, the Secretariat, job well done on your first.
Majority Leader, I rise today on a matter of personal and collective privilege. Ginoong Pangulo, simula po noong nakamit natin ang ating kalayaan, 8 bersyon ng konstitusyon ang umiral sa ating bansa. The 1989 Malolos Constitution, the Philippine Organic Act of 1902, the Jones Law of 1916, the 1935 Constitution, the 1943 Constitution, the 1973 Constitution, the 1986 Freedom Constitution, and our present Constitution, the 1987 Constitution. Sa 8 Philippine Constitution na aking nabanggit, tanging sa 1987 Constitution lamang po natin matagpuan ang People's Initiative bilang pamamaraan para amendahan ang konstitusyon. Isa po ang People's Initiative sa mga probisyon na nagbibigay ng kapangyarihan sa mamamayan na magpasimuno ng reforma sa pamahalaan. In the words of Justice Panganiban, in his separate opinion, in the case of Miriam Defensor Santiago versus Comelec, and I quote, "Initiative like referendum and recall is a new and treasured feature of the Filipino constitutional system. All three are institutionalized legacies of the world-admired EDSA people power. Like elections and plebiscites, they are hallowed expressions of popular sovereignty. They are sacred democratic rights of our people to be used as their final weapons against political excesses, opportunism, inaction, oppression, and misgovernance, as well as their preserved instruments to exact transparency, accountability, and faithfulness from their chosen leaders." End of quote. I repeat, Mr. President, it is a sacred democratic right of our people to be used as their final weapons against political excesses, opportunism, inaction, oppression, and misgovernance. Ito po ang isa sa purposes ng People's Initiative as envisioned by the framers of the 1987 Constitution. Pinahahalagahan po ng saligang batas ang gampanin ng mamamayan na siguruhin na patuloy na lalamanin ng mga pahina nito ang kanilang mga interes at kapakanan. After all government authority emanates from the people. However, if the people are being misled, deceived, and coerced to sign a piece of document proposing to amend the Constitution for a certain amount of money, then the initiative is invalidated. Worse, its intentions are tarnished. The sacredness of initiative is stained by selfish motives. Ang pinagtataka po natin ngayon, bakit tila ang umiikot na so-called People's Initiative ay isang politician's initiative? Pareho pa rin silang PI, Mr. President. This is an insult and outright affront to the space duly afforded to us by the Constitution. A space intended to accommodate our people's capacity to introduce reforms. Ginoong Pangulo, mga kababayan, mayroon pong 3 pamamaraan upang baguhin ang mga titik ng ating konstitusyon. Ang 2 sa 3 proseso na ito ay nangangailangan ng direktang partisipasyon ng mga halal na mga mambabatas, mga kongresista at tayong mga senador. Nag-iisa po ang pamamaraan na nakareserba para sa taong bayan para amendahan ang saligang batas. Ito po ang tinatawag natin na People's Initiative. Bakit po kaya hindi gamitin ng mga politician na nagsusulong ng Politicians Initiative ang 2 pamamaraan na nasa konstitusyon kung gusto nilang baguhin ang ating saligang batas? Bakit hindi pa sapat sa ilang mga mamabatas na mapagkalooban ng dalawang pagpipilian para baguhin ang konstitusyon. Kailangan ba na pati ang direktang inilaan para sa ating mga mamamayan ay kukunin at gagamitin ng mga gahamang politiko? Tila Ginoong Pangulo, sa pagdaan ng mga araw, mas maraming katanungan pa ang nadadagdag kaysa mga kasagutan sa Politicians Initiative. Pero isa po ang nabigyang linaw. Mayroong mga kumikilos upang manlinlang ng ating mamamayan. Mga individual at mga grupo na tila ang tingin lamang sa pamahalaan ay isang negosyo na pwedeng pagkakitaan. Handa silang mamuhunan sa pagbili ng mga pirma o lagda. Napakadali lamang, lalo na kung hindi naman kinabukasan ng bayan ang kanilang turing dito, kundi isang tseke na maaari nilang ipalit sa salapi pagdating ng panahon. Nakalulungkot na ang pinagsamantalahan ay siyang mga kababayan natin mga walang-wala sa buhay. Sila na ang mga nagdarahop at naghihikahos. Silang mga nagugutom at walang hanap buhay. May mga pagkakataon na ilan sa ating mga kababayan na pumirma sa kadudad-dudang People's Initiative ay wala ng ibang makakapitan kundi patalim. Kapalit ng munting halaga ay pagsangla ng kaluluwa. Nakagagalit na silang mga vulnerable ang palaging target ng panlilinlang ng mga politikong may mga pansariling motibo. Nakakapanlumong isipin kung paano sinamantala ang kahirapan sa buhay ng mga mamamayan para lamang sa sariling kapakanan ng mga nasa kapangyarihan. Minsan naisip ko, Mr. President, kung nangyari ito nung bata pa ako, malamang kasama ang aking mga magulang sa mga hihikayatin nilang pumirma. At dahil mahirap lang kami, baka nga pumirma sila. Kaya ganun na lamang ang aking galit, Mr. President, sa pananamantalang ito. Pumirma ka na lang, bahala na kung hindi naintindihan. Di bali, may 100 pesos ka o kaya 3,000 pesos, may panghapunan na kayo ng pamilya mo. I feel it is my obligation to stand up for the poor because I know what it is like to believe that you do not have a choice. It is my obligation to tell every single one who is listening to me right now, be it inside this halls or on some video being aired, you always have a choice. And the Senate is ready to support you in making a real, informed, dignified choice. Ginoong Pangulo, nais ko pong susugan ang pananawagan ng ating Majority Leader, Senator Joel Villanueva. Hinihikayat po natin ang ating mga kababayan na niloko, pinilit maging iyong mga nakatanggap ng panunuhol kapalit ang kanilang pagpirma sa isang dokumento kung saan hindi malinaw sa paglahad kung ano ang reforma na gustong iamyenda sa konstitusyon. Lumantad kayo at huwag matakot. Tulungan niyo po ang iyong Senado na pananagutin ang mga nagsamantalang sa mga kahinaan. Laging bukas ang bulwagan ng Senado at handang pangalagaan ang sinumang nais magsiwalat ng katotohanan at nagmamahal sa ating bayan. May kasabihan po tayo, walang manluloko kung walang magpapaloko. But you know, Mr. President, I think this saying is a case of victim blaming, lalong-lalo na sa sitwasyong ito. Sa kasalukuyang panahon, tingnan natin ito mula sa ibang perspektiba. Patawan ng parusa ang mga naluloko at huwag ipataw ang sisi sa mga inosenteng naloko. If the ill-intentioned have done their part in attempting to distort and destroy the very spirit of initiative, I implore the Senate, let us not allow such distortion to succeed. Let us take the initiative, so to speak, to protect our people from sinister motives. Protect, most especially, the ones who are unable to do it for themselves. The Senate does not and will never infringe on the right of the people to exercise the right guaranteed by the Constitution. Justice Panganiban declares that, and I quote, the right to propose amendments to the Constitution is really a species of the right of free speech and free assembly. And certainly, it would be tyrannical and despotic to stop anyone from speaking freely and persuading others to conform to her beliefs. As the eminent Voltaire once said, I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. After all, freedom is not really for the truth we agree with, but as Justice Holmes wrote, freedom for the truth that we hate. End of quote. I would like to assure our Filipino people that the Senate, as the last bastion of democracy, does and always will support the people's clamor to institute reforms, whether this would be crafting laws or amending the Constitution itself. The Senate exists because of the people, and we will continue to push for the uplifting of the life of every Filipino. In the event that our people would come to truly believe that it is only through their own efforts that they can rewrite the letters of the Constitution to a form and content that they think embodies their ideals, I am sure that the Senate will be the first to support. However, the Senate will also be the first to condemn if the right to people's initiative is being bastardized by enterprising politicians. The Senate will not allow and will therefore condemn any form of threat, coercion, or bribery that compromises the future of our country and our people. I call on the persons behind this deceptive and fraudulent people's initiative. Make amends, not to our Constitution, but to the people, our people, whom you have maliciously enticed to unknowingly sell their future. Maraming salamat, Mr. President.
Maraming salamat, Senator Bato de la Rosa. Mabuhay ka. Very passionate speaker.
Mr. President, may I be allowed to just make or pose some clarificatory questions, Mr. President? If the gentleman from Davao and Bohol would yield to some clarificatory questions, Mr. President, from this representation.
Yes, if he so wishes.
Yes, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. At the onset, Mr. President, let me state for the record my sincerest gratitude and sa Tagalog, Mr. President, yung pagsaludo sa isang senador na re-electionist ito, Mr. President. Hindi marunong matakot na gawin ang tama. Hindi marunong matakot na ipaglaban ang karapatan ng mamamayang Pilipino. Let me just put that on record, Mr. President. I salute, whether you agree with him or not, you salute, Mr. President, the character of this gentleman who is here today in this August chamber to deliver such a compelling and passionate privileged speech, Mr. President. Mr. President, ang unang katanungan ko sa ating kasama dito sa bulwagang ito, binanggit niyo po, Ginoong Pangulo, yung third mode of changing the Constitution, which is people's initiative, Mr. President. Pwede ho bang malaman natin, Ginoong Pangulo, na pag people's initiative, kailangan po ba non-partisan? Kailangan po ba hindi ginagamit ang anumang makinarya ng pamahalaan ng gobyerno? Ginagamit ang programa ng iba't ibang departamento para lamang makakalap ng pirma? Ito po ba ay natural? Sapagkat marami ho sa ating mga kababayan, Ginoong Pangulo, ang nagtatanong. Ito ba ay natural na nangyayari? Hindi ho bulag ang mga Pilipino, Ginoong Pangulo. Nakita natin sa telebisyon, narinig natin sa mga radyo, na-monitor natin sa social media. Isang kababayan natin, kaya ho ako'y bilib na bilib sa ating kasamahan dito sapagkat inilagay niya yung kanyang sarili doon sa mga taong binanggit niya na parang nagkakapit patalim na lamang, Ginoong Pangulo, sapagkat tama po ba natatanggap ka ng ayuda mula sa pamahalaan, programa ng pamahalaan, pero kailangan mong pumirma sa isang dokumentong hindi mo naiintindihan? Ito po ba'y natural? Ito po ba ay people's initiative, Mr. President, Ginoong Pangulo?
Well, Mr. President, Majority Leader, as I've said, sa nakikita natin na nangyayari ngayon, tila lumalabas na hindi naman talaga ito kagustuhan ng taong bayan. So this is not a people's initiative. This is politicians' initiative. Kung sino yung mga politiko na nasa likuran na nagpapatakbo nitong people's initiative kuno. So, very clear yan, Mr. President. At yung pangalawang sinabi mo, Mr. President, na natural ba na gamitin yung pondo ng bayan katulad ng AX, pondo ng gobyerno to entice these people to vote or to sign, to get their signature? Ay, yun po, Mr. President, ay lantarang vote buying kung tutuusin. Vote buying po talaga yan. These people are enticed to give their signature in exchange of the money that is being offered to them through the government programs and services like AX, TUPAD, and what other programs that we have, Mr. President.
Ginoong Pangulo, ako ay humahanga sa ating kasama dito sa Senado sapagkat alam ko ho, siya ho ay taga Davao, taga Bohol, ngunit malalalim yung Tagalog na ginamit, Pilipino na ginamit ng ating kasama dito sa Senado. Natatandaan ko ho, yung binanggit niyang isang salita, naghihikahos, nagdarahop. Ginoong Pangulo, ako po, habang nakikinig ako sa ating kasamahan dito sa Senado, hindi ko mapigil kung hindi mapukaw yung silakbo ng aking dugo sapagkat binabanggit ng ating kasamahan yung pananamantala. Gaano ba kabigat yung ginagawang pananamantala na ating nararanasan sa ngayon, Ginoong Pangulo, na isang Pilipino, idadanggel mo yung salapi mula sa DSWD, yung pangako na ikaw ay pipirma kapalit ang ayuda ng pamahalaan, yung pangako na pipirma ka lang, makakasama ka na sa mabibigyan ng biyaya ng mga politiko. Kapalit ang iyong pirma. Ito ba yung insulto, Mr. President? Ito ba yung insulto sa iyo, Mr. President? Ito ba yung insulto sa ating institusyon sapagkat ang bawat isa na nagluklok sa atin bilang senador ng Republika ng Pilipinas, nung tayo po ay binoto bilang kinatawan nila as national leaders, Mr. President. Not as district representatives, not as party list representatives, but national leaders. Is this an insult, Mr. President? Is this disenfranchisement, Mr. President? Disenfranchisement of the very sacred right of every Filipino, the right to suffrage, Mr. President. May we know the thoughts of the gentleman from Davao, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, sa simula pa lang, talagang nakikita na natin na yung layunin nito ay iba, Mr. President. Because nobody dares to admit that they are the ones behind this so-called People's Initiative. Walang umaangkin. Pero sa Bisaya pa, Mr. President, ako'y natingala. Ako'y nagtataka. Bakit merong lumabas na timeline na nakaprogram na doon kung anong mga courses of action, anong mangyayari in the next coming days. Pero hanggang ngayon na ayaw nilang aminin na sino talaga ang nasa likuran nito. Very clear po, Mr. President. Ako po ay may nakausap na congressman. Hindi ko lang sabihin. Sinabi niya, talagang instruction yan sa aming liderato ng Kongreso. Sa mababang kapulungan. Ang instruction pa nga sa kanila is not only to get 3% of the number of registered voters in their respective congressional district, but to get at least 20%. That is according to my friend Congressman, Mr. President. So, kung yan ang ginagamit yung ating pundo ng gobyerno para makakalap ng perma, hindi lang yan insulto, Mr. President, para sa akin. Kung meron pang word na mas mabigat pa sa insulto, kaya nga minsan, maiisip ko, Mr. President, tila ba yung sinasabi natin na interparliamentary courtesy ay parang napapalitan na ng interparliamentary treachery, Mr. President. Sa ginawa nilang yan sa atin, kung saan gusto nilang kapunin, gusto nilang tanggalan ng power ang Senado para magbigay boses sa lahat ng Pilipino. We are not only elected by a single congressional district, we are elected by the whole of the Filipino people. Gusto nilang tanggalan ng boses ang Senado by the mere subject of their People's Initiative, which is voting jointly, Mr. President. Hindi lang ito insulto, Mr. President, kung isang pang-iisa, isang panlalamang, at isang, I don't know kung ano pang Tagalog na pwede kong sabihin dito. Kung Bisaya lang, Mr. President, mas marami pa akong masasabi. Pero wag na lang, hindi maintindihan ng lahat ng Pilipino yung aking sasabihin.
Mr. President, Ginoong Pangulo, as I speak before you today, Mr. President, I am hearing and seeing some news reports from leaders of the other chamber quoting this representation's name, Mr. President, na may ebidensya daw po ba, Mr. President? Ginoong Pangulo, gusto kong banggitin sa bulwagang ito, kahapon nag-launch tayo sa social media lamang, Mr. President. para sa mga lalaki at babaeng nabudol, nasamantala, at na-realize nila na sila ay niloko at ginoyo ng pekeng initiative na ito, PI din, Mr. President. After 24 hours, Mr. President, libo-libong complaints, picture ng text messages, picture ng mga aktibidades, Mr. President, ang ating nakalap. 90%, Ginoong Pangulo, 90% ng mga nagre-reklamo, sinasabi ang pangalan ng kongresista, pangalan ng mga staff ng kongresista, pangalan ng mga chiefs of staff ng kongresista. Mr. President, nagkataon lang ho ba ito? Nagkataon lang ho ba ito, Mr. President? Ang tanong ko. Sa tingin niyo po, Ginoong Pangulo, kayo po na nagsabi na meron din po kayong nakausap na ilang kongresista. Meron din po ako. Alam niyo, Ginoong Pangulo, napakasakit po para sa akin magsalita ng ganito dahil galing po tayo sa House of Representatives. Kayo, Ginoong Pangulo, Senator Risa, Senator Sani, Senator JB, Senator Win, Senator Mark, lahat po tayo galing ng House of Representatives. Ako po, Ginoong Pangulo, wala akong Joel Villanueva kung walang House of Representatives. Lahat po ng natutunan ko, paano ako makakapag-contribute for nation building, natutunan ko sa House of Representatives. Kaya masakit po sa akin, Ginoong Pangulo, ang makita 90% ng reklamo, House of Representatives. Nagtataon ho ba ito, Ginoong Pangulo? Pagsasalita na po ako, yung alam ko ho, personal, hindi lang yung sinumbong sa akin na sinasabi kong 90%. Sa aking lalawigan, ito yung pinakamasakit. Lalawigang tinubuan ko, Mr. President. 20 taon mahigit ang hinintay bago nagkaroon ng representante ang dakilang lalawigan ng Bulacan dito sa bulwagang ito. Tapos may ganito, Mr. President. Nakausap ko yung mga konsehal, nakausap ko yung mga kapitan, nakausap ko pati toda, Mr. President, na ginamit ng mga kongresista doon. Doon nga po sa Hagunoy, pinapirma sila. Sa Hagunoy, Bulacan, hindi alam kung ano yung pinipirmahan. Meron pang iba, sabi, online game lang. Nanalo kang 300 pesos, i-Gcash sa'yo. Bigay mo lang yung telepono mo. Nandito po. At hindi kagaya noong mga nagpalabas ng TV ad at nagpupush ng peking inisyatibo na ito, hindi nila mapinpoint kung sino sila. Handa po ako ibigay ito. Handa akong sabihin kung sino itong mga ito. Ipakita itong mga ebidensya na ito, Mr. President. I'm just wondering, Mr. President, bakit ganito? Nakita ko po si Senator Cynthia Villar, galing din po sa House of Representatives. Bakit ganito, Ginoong Pangulo? Hindi ho ba pagpapalit ng kalye, pangalan ng kalye dito sa Pilipinas, pag pinapalitan po ang kalye, pangalan ng kalye. Ginoong Pangulo, matanong ko po ang ating distinguished colleague, pag pinapalitan po ba ang kalye, pangalan ng kalye dito sa Pilipinas, pagkatapos po bang maipasa sa House of Representatives, batas na po ito, palitan na ang kalye?
Hindi pa, Ginoong Pangulo.
May Senado pa.
Dadaan pa yan sa Senado.
Pagkatapos may bycam. Mr. President, hindi pangalan ng kalye ang pinapalitan. Kaluluwa ng bayan natin ang pinapalitan. Na for almost 40 years, hindi ginagalaw. Na for almost 40 years, hindi basta-basta pinakikialaman. Bakit? Kaluluwa ng bayan to. Now you see, with your own eyes, on television, now you hear the complaints of the people. And I will use and borrow the words of Senator Bato de la Rosa, yung mga nagdarahop, yung mga naghihikahos, mga nangangailangan ng tulong, nangangailangan ng ayuda ng gobyerno, umaasa sa tulong ng gobyerno, pagsasamantalahan natin para lamang ma-extend ang termino natin, para lamang ma-abolish ang Senado. Mr. President, kung gusto ng taong bayang i-abolish ang Senado, I don't mind. If it is the will of the people, I don't mind. Ano mang klaseng gusto ng ating mga kababayan, dalhin man ang ating bayan sa kangkungan, dalhin man ang ating bayan sa impyerno, kung yan ang gusto ng taong bayan, susunod tayo. Re-respetuhin natin. Pero Mr. President, Ginoong Pangulo, kung ayuda ng gobyerno, ipagkakait mo. Kung hindi ka pipirma,
Hindi ka makatanggap.
hindi ka makakatanggap. At ano ito? Katang isip ni Senator Bato de la Rosa? Katang isip ni Joel Villanueva? Bakit hindi natin tanungin ang bayan? Bakit hindi natin tanungin si Juan de la Cruz? Ito ba ay People's Initiative? Mr. President, I can go on and on, but I just wanted to also ask our dear colleague, Where do we go from here, Mr. President? How do you want this privilege speech, Mr. President? Pagkatapos nating i-refer, and I suppose, if I may, mamaya ay i-refer ito dun sa committee ni Senator Amy Marcos ng Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation. Ano yung pwede nating magawa dito, Mr. President? Ngayon na pagkatapos ng meeting ng ating pinuno ng Senado at ng pinuno ng Kamara de Representantes na tayo po'y nagsunog ng kilay para ayusin at siguruhin yung mga gusto kuno ng ating mga kausap na marami din naman sa atin pabor doon sa economic provisions, kaya nga po natin pinasa yung Public Services Act. 5 sektor lang yung hindi natin pinagalaw na magkaroon ng 100% ownership, Mr. President. Ngayon, Mr. President, where do we go from here? Kailangan pa ba nating ispilingin yan, Mr. President? Kailangan pa bang i-memorize yan kung seryoso yung ating mga kausap, Mr. President? Sa pagpapasa nitong joint resolution na ito? That's my question, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, if I may add, kanina, nag-start yung aking investigation on the alleged scam ng ayuda scam na nangyayari sa Davao del Norte. At kami doon, lahat na nandun na senador, ay akala namin yun ang pinaka-the worst na nangyari. Yung 10,000 na ayuda na binigay, ay binawi yung 9,000 at 1,000 lang ay binigay sa ating mga kababayan na pumirma. So, out of 10,000, 9,000 binulsa ng mga nag-recruit sa kanila at ang 1,000 ay binigay sa kanila. Akala ko, the worst na yun na pangyayari. Pero if I am going to borrow the words of our majority leader, hindi lang 9,000 ang katumbas ng ginagawa ngayon ng People's Initiative, kundi kaluluwa ng ating bayan ang kapalit ng perma ng ating mga kababayan. Well, dapat ang Senado ay hindi matutulog. I implore all our colleagues, wag nating hayaan ito. Magtutulungan tayo dito. Hindi natin papayagan na masisira itong ating bansa dahil lang sa kagustuhan ng ilang mga politiko na gustong mag-perpetuate in power, Mr. President. Thank you.
With the permission of the majority floor leader.
Mr. President.
Yung kaninang binanggit mo, Senator Bato, ang 10,000, kinupit ang 9,000, kinuha. O kinupit o ninakaw, binawi yung 9,000 at naiwan yung 1,000.
Yes,
at
Mr.
para yan pumirma sa People's Initiative.
Hindi yun, Mr. President. Iba yun.
Iba yun.
Iba.
Kasi dalawang krimen, kung yan ang nangyari, dalawang krimen ang nangyari doon. So, ang sinasabi mo, ito ay ayuda lamang.
Ayuda lamang. Ayuda lamang. Ang comparison lang na pinapakita ko is that yung katumbas ng perma nila ay 9,000 na napunta sa korupsyon. Pero itong ginagawang People's Initiative, ang katumbas ng kanilang perma ay kinabukasan ng ating bayan. That is immeasurable. Ang value po niyan ay hindi po ma-quantify, Mr. President. So, napakahirap po i-reconcile. Ito mga latest na pangyayari sa ating bansa, Ginoong Pangulo.
Thank you.
Mr. President, may I also ask the gentleman from Davao and Bohol, where do we go from here, Mr. President? May mga COMELEC officials na po sa ilang parte ng ating bansa, whether district or regional, na tumatanggap nitong mga peking pirma na pinagsamantalahan, pirma na nagoyo yung pumirma, Mr. President. Where do we go from here, Mr. President? Ano bang accountability, Ginoong Pangulo, ng ating mga opisyales ng COMELEC para tignan ito? Kasi meron po isang nagsasabi sa isang artikulo na ang tanging mandato lamang ng COMELEC ay tumanggap ng pirma. Hindi na po nila iniimbestigahan ito. Meron naman nagsasabing pwedeng mag-imbestiga. Ngunit sa aking pagkakaalam, Mr. President, matagal-tagal na rin po tayo dito sa mundo ng lehislatura, Mr. President. As I mentioned, I was a term member of the House, and this is my second term here in the Senate. Hindi naman po ganun talaga makapag-imbestiga ang COMELEC sa mga ganitong gawain, Mr. President. So, what can we do, Mr. President?
I think, Mr. President, right now, we cannot stop COMELEC from accepting all the signatures being submitted to them because it is their duty to receive all those signatures. But doon na lang natin sila sisingilin, Mr. President, sa kanilang function sa pag-verify. yung verification nila. Dapat ito ay gagawin nila ng totoo at may halong konsensya, Mr. President. Sana may konsensya sila sa kanilang gagawing verification later on, Mr. President.
Perhaps, Mr. President, I would encourage my distinguished colleague, Senator Bato, to look into this specific law, if there is any, Mr. President, to not just ministerially accept all these signatures despite the fact that they are very much aware of what is happening. In fact, Mr. President, just today, I made an announcement that because just like our dear colleague, hindi ko humasikmura ito, Mr. President. Hindi ko humasikmura talaga. Ako'y mag-retire na after my term here in the Senate, Mr. President. And hindi ko lang humasikmura itong ginagawang paglapastangan sa payak na karapatan ng ating mga kababayan. Lalong-lalo na sa pagpapalit ng ating konstitusyon. If there's one word to describe what's happening right now, Mr. President, nakakasalukasok. Nakakasalukasok itong ginagawang ito, Mr. President. Mr. President, this is bigger than us, bigger than you and me, bigger than all of us, bigger than this institution. When you talk about the Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines. Mr. President, perhaps we can do something about it. Kung alam natin na may problema, at gaya ng nabanggit ko, Mr. President, ako mismo ay willing na spearhead yung pong pagbawi ng pirma ng ating mga kababayan. Kaya sa mga nanonood po sa atin, live streaming sa Facebook o kung saan man, inaanyayahan ko po kayo, gaya ng binanggit kanina ni Senator Bato, magsumbong po kayo. Aalalayan po namin kayo. All you need to do is magkaroon ho kayo ng affidavit, gagawa ho namin kayo ng form. Punta lang ho kayo sa inyong lokal na COMELEC office sa inyong lugar at sabihin ang nangyari at binabawi ninyo ang inyong pirma. Kasi ho ako, sa aking experience, Mr. President, doon ho sa aming lalawigan, lalo na sa aming distrito, nakakalungkot po yung nangyari sa aming distrito. Wala ho akong nakausap ni isa. Ako'y gagalangin ko ho, Mr. President, Senator Bato de la Rosa, gagalangin ko po yung aking kababayan na magsabi sa akin, gusto ko itong pagpapalit ng ating konstitusyon, gusto kong revisahin, gusto kong tignan. Gusto kong i-review. Gusto kong magkaroon ng unicameral form of government. Gusto kong buwagin ng Senado. Gagalangin ko po Actually, gagalangin ko po. Wala ho akong problema doon. Pero sa aming distrito, wala pa ho akong nakausap ni isa na naiintindihan yung kanyang pinirmahan. Ni isa na nagsabing pinapirma siya at in-explain kung ano nga ba itong People's Initiative na voting jointly ang Kamara at Senado. Na ang Speaker o ang Senate President, hindi and, Mr. President, Speaker or Senate President may call to convene a Constituent Assembly. Wala ho akong narinig na gano'n. Ulitin ko po, Mr. President, gagalangin ko kung yun ay bukal sa loob ng aking kababayan. Sino man po sila, nasaan man po sila. Pero ulitin ko po, sa aming distrito, wala pa ho ako nakausap.
Well, Mr. President, the mere fact na ito'y ginawa nila while we are on break. Nasa Christmas vacation tayo, nagkakaroon sila ng blitzkrieg attack. Mr. President, how do you qualify that kind of situation? Naka-break tayo, bigla na lang, lumabas ito ngayon, at wala na. We're caught off guard.
Are you saying there's bad faith, Mr. President?
Well, I presume there is bad faith. Then, pwede namang sabihin sa atin, pagkain tayo, na gusto namin ito, kung meron silang respeto sa atin, pwede naman lang sabihin na gusto namin ito, introduce namin ito, sa ayaw nyo sa gusto, we will go for it. Pero wag naman yung patalikod, Mr. President, na mabulaga na lang tayo habang tayo nasa vacation. Ganun na lang.
What about the result of our caucus, Mr. President? Tayo ay nag-caucus, if you recall, Mr. President, para pag-usapan itong joint resolution na supposed to be ay ating tatalakayin ngayong mga panahon na ito, ngayong araw na ito, Mr. President. What do you think would happen to this, Mr. President, after knowing na parang may bad faith, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, hanggang ngayon, ako po'y tuliro. Anong gagawin natin? So I leave it up to the leadership of the Senate at pag-usapan po natin yan para magkakaroon tayo ng united stand on this particular issue. I leave it up to I am a good soldier. I will follow our Senate President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Diyan po nagwawakas ang aking maikling interpellation sa ating kasama dito sa Senado. Muli, taus-puso akong nagpapasalamat at sumasaludo sa ating kasama sa Senado, Senator Bato de la Rosa, na hindi natatakot panggitin ang katotohanan sapagkat ngayong araw na ito ginugunita natin ang Malolos Congress. At ang nakakatuwa po, Ginoong Pangulo, sa mga delegado ng Malolos Congress, mayroon po silang isang salita. matatayuan natin ang paninindigan ng ating mga framers ng Malolos Congress. At gaya ng ating kasamahan dito sa Senado, Senator Bato de la Rosa, nais kong ilagay sa talaan ng bulwagang ito na hindi po tayo papasindak, na hindi po tayo titiklop sa anumang uri ng atake. Hindi lamang sa institusyong ito, hindi lamang sa ating mga sarili, kundi atake sa karapatan ng bawat mamamayang Pilipino. Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo. Maraming salamat, Senator Bato de la Rosa.
Maraming salamat, Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Pre-
Hangang-hanga din po ako sa ating mahal na kaibigan, kababayan, taga Mindanao, Senator Bato de la Rosa is slowly becoming a statesman of the Senate. And he's no longer looking at local politics or petty issues. He's now taking up the challenges of our institution. And I salute him for that. Maraming salamat, sir.
Mr. President, Senator Robin Hood Padilla is also seeking the floor. I move that he be recognized.
Ang ating kapatid, Senator Robin Hood Padilla, sir.
Maraming salamat po, Ginoong Pangulo, at sa ating pinunong mayorya. Gusto ko lamang pong sundan ang napakagandang talumpati ni Senator Bato de la Rosa. Ganun din po ang iminungkahi at ibinato ng ating pinunong mayorya patungkol po sa People's Initiative. Bilang ako po ay chairman ng Committee ng Amendments and Revision, nais ko pong ipaalam sa inyo, Ginoong Pangulo, na ako po mismo ay may sarili ding People's Initiative. Iyan po ay aking isinusulong at nais ko pong ipaalam sa lahat na wala pong sa konstitusyon natin, Article 70, napakaliwanag, na meron po talagang tatlong moda. At yan ng Constitutional Assembly, CONCON, at People's Initiative. Ang nais ko lamang pong linawin, mahal na Ginoong Pangulo, na wala pong masama sa People's Initiative. Wala. Yan po ay kasama sa konstitusyon at yan po ay pinalalakas. Katulad po ng sinabi ni Senator Bato de la Rosa, ito po ay esensya ng ating demokrasya. Ang nagkakaroon lamang po ng hindi naaayon sa saligang batas na umiiral sa atin ngayon ng 1987 Constitution, malinaw po doon sa Article 6 din ang legislative body, ang paghihiwalay ng Senado at ng House of Representatives. Ang magkahiwalay na kapangyarihan, lalong-lalo na sa tinatawag nating voting powers. Nagkaroon lamang po tayo ng pagkakataon na maging suliranin yung voting sapagkat doon sa Article 17 hindi malinaw na naisulat. Pero doon sa Article 6, Section 21, kung hindi po ako nagkakamali, in time of war, malinaw po doon na ang Senado at ang House ay meron silang magkasamang pagpupulong at sila ay boboto separately. Napakalinaw po nun. Hindi lang po natin maintindihan kung bakit nagkaroon ng People's Initiative na ipinipilit ang voting jointly. Ang pag-uusapan natin ay saligang batas. Ito po ay talagang kailangan po natin pag-usapan ng mahaba, kasama po ang malaking kapulungan, ang House. Hindi po ito para po sa akin pong ibinigay niyong komite, pinag-aralan ko po ito, ang ating konstitusyon. Ito pong voting jointly ay lumalabag sa artikulo ng legislative body sapagkat meron pong paghihiwalay ng kapangyarihan. At yan pong kapangyarihan, yung voting, kasama po yan. At malinaw sa ating konstitusyon. Kaya mahal na Ginoong Pangulo, hayaan niyo po akong makapagpasalamat sa bumubuo ng ating Senado at inyo pong ipinaglalaban yung ating kapangyarihan na magkaroon ng voting separately. Sapagkat ito po ang sinasabi ng 1987 Constitution. At ang People's Initiative po ay ang pwede lang po natin gawin lamang ay amendment. Hindi po tayo pwedeng mag-revision ng konstitusyon na gagamitin ang People's Initiative. Sapagkat piecemeal lang ang pwede natin gawin. Amendment lang, hindi po revision. Kaya po sana, maging malinaw po ito sa ating taong bayan na ang ating pong winawaksi dito, ngayon, sa ating bulwatan ng Senado ay yung sinasabing pagtatanggal ng kapangyarihan sa Senado. Yun po ay talagang parang isinawalang bahala na natin ang saligang batas. Kailangan po tindigan natin ang saligang batas sapagkat tayo po ay nanumpa sa harap ng saligang batas. At yun lamang po, mahal na Pangulo, maraming salamat po. Mabuhay ang Senado.
Maraming salamat, Senator Robin Hood Padilla. Ako'y humahanga din po sa inyo. Alam ko, ang inyong advocacy is to amend the charter to improve the constitution ng ating bansa. At pumirma po kayo dito dahil sa puntong iyon na binanggit mo, na dahil ayaw po makapon ng Senado, ayaw nyo pong walang saysay ang Senado dito sa usaping charter change. Kaya mabuhay po kayo, Senator. Marami po sa amin ay naniniwala din po sa inyo na dapat meron tayong mga kailangan baguhin, pero sa tamang paraan. Maraming salamat. Majority Floor Leader.
Yes, Mr. President. Next to make a manifestation is our Minority Leader, Senator Coco Pimentel. I move that he be recognized.
Our distinguished Minority Floor Leader, former Senate President of this August Chamber, this institution that has lasted for 107 years, no other than Senator Coco Pimentel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ano lang po, maikling inputs kasi meron pa tayong gagawing caucus. I think a colleague will also share his thoughts with us. Well, kanina po sa exchanges for dialogue nila Majority Leader at saka ni Senator Bato de la Rosa, nag-raise ng tanong si Majority Leader, ano ang pwedeng gawin? Sa tingin ko marami tayong pwedeng gawin. Siguro panawagan natin sa ating mga kababayan, yung mga hindi pa nakapirma, huwag kayong pumirma rito sa iniikot na People's Initiative kasi tagong-tago po yung agenda, nakatago sa mga mabibigat at magagandang salita na tungkol sa procedure sa pag-amenda ng konstitusyon. Hindi po yan ang unod, yung substance ng plano. Parang chess po ito, pero madali lang din basahin. Mga 2 to 3 moves ahead lang po. Kita na po natin ano po ang agenda po nila. Kaya yun ang pakiusap natin. Tapos si Majority Leader ay nag-launch na naman ng kanyang online movement na doon naman sa mga nakapirma, pwede po silang mag-manifest na nung kami napapirma, hindi naman niya napaliwanag sa amin ng totoo, ng mabuti, or kami naabutan ng isang bagay na may halaga, bawal po yun, na pera man or isang bagay na may halaga, or napangakuan na may darating na bagay na may halaga in the future. So, posible pong gawin po nila yon. Tapos, siguro na lang, for the consideration of Senator Bato, ang aking opinion is actually meron na pong justiciable controversy. Hindi na po natin kailangan hintayin na yung formal petition kung lalantad na yung mga tao nasa likod nito. Magpa-file kasi yan ng petition sa COMELEC. Sa aking palagay, meron na pong justiciable controversy ngayon at yung mga interesado dito sa issue na to, pwede na tayong mag-meeting as on this legal matter kasi tinatanggap ng COMELEC Tinatanggap ng COMELEC yung binibigay ng mga papel na may pirma. So therefore, COMELEC is following a certain procedure. Ang sabi nila may resolution sila. But COMELEC cannot give power unto itself. Therefore, there must have been a law authorizing the COMELEC to receive these signatures and to follow a certain procedure pursuant to the resolution na pinromulgate pa ng COMELEC. Kung parehas ang law na iniisip natin, itong law po na ito, kalimutan ko lang po yung RA number, itong Republic Act number na ito, 6735, ay naging subject matter na ng isang kaso, yung nabanggit na rin po, nabanggit yata ni Senator De La Rosa, the defensor case versus COMELEC. At ang conclusion ng Supreme Court doon, that law is insufficient to support a people's initiative. That is in an extended decision. Alam ko na po yung sagot ng whoever, kung sino man yung nasa likod nito, na hindi pa naman klaro kung sino. Parang chess mo ito, na-anticipate natin yung next move nila. Sasabihin nila, meron daw second case na yung sa Lambino case, yung the original Pirma case, na meron daw so-called minute resolution ng Supreme Court on the resolution sa MR kasi natalo naman yung pirma nun Pero nag-motion for reconsideration yung mga natalo. Hindi rin sila nanalo sa motion for reconsideration, pero sa minute resolution, yan yung mga maiikling mga iikling mga order ng korte. mayroong last paragraph doon na sinabi na 10 members of the court are of the opinion that RA 6735 is sufficient to support the people's initiative. Yun po yung counter nila sa ating action. Pero alam na rin po natin yung counter argument po natin doon na ang minute resolution does not form part of the laws of the land under the civil code. Kasi sa civil code, decisions of the Supreme Court form part of the laws of the land. Decisions of the Supreme Court. The Miriam Defensor versus Comelec case is a decision. Okay. Ibabangga ng mga proponents nito is a mere minute resolution. Walang signature ng justices po doon. Clerk of the division. Okay. So, and then, can a decision of a division in a minute resolution overturn a decision of the Supreme Court even if rendered by a division? Hindi. Basic na basic sa Constitution yun. If you reverse something en banc. So, I think we already have a justiciable controversy here and we can act. So we can act, kung makita pa natin, we can act politically by calling on the people to not to sign, and for those who have signed to withdraw their signature. We can act legally, in the sense of filing cases to already question what the COMELEC is doing. What is your business receiving all these papers with signatures at sinasabi nila they have a ministerial role to play as of the moment? Based on what? On a law already characterized by the Supreme Court as insufficient to support a people's initiative. At saka, Mr. President, as well, since itong people's initiative ngayon is an improvement dun sa PIRMA case na sinabi ko. Kasi yung sa PIRMA case before, signatures lang ang sinabit, wala yung, hindi naka-reflect kung ano yung amendment. Okay, in this particular case, naka-reflect ng amendment. Okay. Pero dahil sa naka-reflect ng amendment, alam na natin yung subject matter. Although yung pagdating sa number of sections affected, iisa lamang, pwedeng sabihin na amendment ito, pero hindi yan ang definition ng amendment. Kung ang pagbabago ay magsasanga-sanga, apektado ang iba-ibang sections ng Constitution, ang konsepto ng bicameral Congress ay apektado, therefore it is not a mere amendment, it is already a revision. Because yung basic structure ng legislative branch ang binabago or kinukontra yung konsepto ng basic structure ng legislative branch. Hence, if it is not an amendment, then it must be a revision. And people's initiative is not available for a revision. So these are our arguments, Mr. President. So sa tanong na what can be done, marami ang pwedeng gawin. I'm sure hindi ko na-exhaust yung pwedeng gawin. That's why we're continuing with our caucuses. Baka meron pa tayong ibang mga ideas na lalabas. So without prejudice to further elaboration in some other future speeches, Mr. President, I will end my intervention for today.
Thank you very much to our Minority Floor Leader. Your experience in law and being a part top-notcher will help us immensely in these cases that we'll be filing. And we'll be filing this together. So maybe stand or adjourn.
We still have one manifestation. Actually, two.
Sir, for the
Our Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Rayson Tiberos.
I'm sorry. Our Deputy Minority Floor Leaders recognized. My apologies, ma'am. My apologies.
Walang problema, ug salamat kaayo, Mr. President. Joining in the spirit of the privileged speech of the good gentleman from Davao and Maynista, for the record, Mr. President, a point that I just wish to reiterate sa ating diskusyon ngayong hapon, hindi tsatsa ang lunas sa mga totoong problema ng mga Pilipino ngayon. Klaro ang daing ng taong bayan. Patuloy na pagtaas sa presyo ng bilihin, kakulangan ng trabaho at kita ng manggagawa, sirang sistema ng pampublikong transportasyon at isang pamahalaan na tila walang pananagutan at tugon sa mga totoo nilang pangangailangan. Mandato ng saligang batas na gawing prioridad ng gobyerno ang pagpuksa sa kahirapan, paglaban sa di pagkakapantay-pantay sa lipunan, pagprotekta sa karapatan ng manggagawa, at paniniguro na lahat ng Pilipino ay may oportunidad na pagandahin ang ating buhay. Ang solusyon dito, tapat na pamamahala at pagsasabuhay sa mga mandato ng 1987 Constitution. Hindi ang pagwawaksi nito para sa pansariling interes. So, that additional point for the record, Mr. President. Og saliwat, salamat kaayo sa good gentleman.
Thank you very much to our distinguished colleague, Senator Rizal de Veros.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last to make a manifestation in this matter is this representation. I move that I be recognized, Mr.
Yes,
President.
our distinguished Deputy Majority Leader is recognized.
Mr. President, my dear colleagues, I share the frustrations of my colleagues in the Senate and the public towards the ongoing People's Initiative. To be clear, I'm not against changing the Constitution per se. I'm open to charter change, especially for the economic provision, for its potential to spur economic development. We are playing catch-up with our ASEAN neighbors. Our priority should be to go full steam ahead on infrastructure development and energy, and in order to make the Philippines competitive and attractive. I believe charter change on economic provisions can help us in this regard. However, we cannot negotiate in bad faith. We cannot play around with the democratic process as important as changing the highest law of the land. And this is how we regard the ongoing petition for People's Initiative. Earlier on, we reached a consensus that we will set aside this type of political circus and instead focus on ensuring that our economic recovery. Nasaan ang palabra de honor? Nasaan ang prioridad natin para sa bayan? Mr. President, the political noise and partisan bickering that will result from this process will only stall our economic recovery. All our efforts in recovering from the pandemic and building a better economy will be for naught if we allow these protracted political squabbles to continue. Charter change will definitely consume much of our time here in the Senate. We will waste our time arguing over voting procedures and other aspects of this political exercise. Marami tayong mga suliranin at hamon na kailangan gawa ng solusyon at bigyan ng pansin. And many of these can be solved without tinkering with the Constitution at this time. Let us do the people's work. Let us work for modernizing our infrastructure and energy, ensuring food security, and revitalizing our economy. All our time, energy, and resources should be focused on these important issues rather than wasting them in a political exercise that will only divide and worse, stall our efforts to ensure a prosperous future for people. Mr. President, nakaka-frustrate. Ang dami nating hinabol ng priority bills, measures that are intended to set as our framework and direction towards recovery and making our country competitive once again. Parang lahat ng ating pinagpaguran, pinagpuyatan, ito man nakaraang buwan ay masasayang. This activity will definitely stall all of these efforts. Nakakapanghinayang. Definitely itong charter change, itong usapin na ito, sabi ko nga po, ito 2 araw na tayo halos. Hindi nakausad. Because of this, talking about this issue, nakakapanghinayang. It's frustrating for me, Mr. President. Personally, I was requested by the economic team to defend the public-private partnership, which was not under my committee. I took the challenge because I wanted to help this administration. Kaya lang parang sayang ang lahat kung ito po ipapasok ngayon. Bakit pa tayo nagpagod? Bakit pa tayo nag-aral? Bakit pa tayo nagpuyat para lamang maipasa ang mga ito? Kung ganito rin lang po ang kahinatnan. I'm just sharing with you my frustration because all of us exerted all our efforts here in the Senate. Dito po talagang tayo nag-aaral para lamang maiayos ang lahat ng mga panukala at maging batas na mag-aayos ng ating pumbayan. There is time for everything, Mr. President. Now is not the time for divisive activity like the People's Initiative. So with that, Mr. President, I move that we refer the privileged speech of Senator De La Rosa and all the interpellation and manifestations thereon to the Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved. And I'd like to share the frustration of the distinguished colleague, Senator Javier Cito. Ang aga-aga pa lang ng administrasyon na to, bakit ang dami-dami ng away? I think we should concentrate on moving forward with the economic agenda for the upliftment of poverty of each and every Filipino that's living in abject poverty, 25%. Minimum wage, tulak natin. May rally kanina. Imbis na charter change, pwede bang taas natin ang sweldo? Pasok natin yan. Pasa natin
ng presyo ng bilihin.
Correct. So I think, my dear colleagues, today has been a very fruitful day for the institution. I think our standing as one in this chamber, not just for our own self-preservation. It's not about self-preservation. It's about looking at the 107 years of history of this hallowed ground, these hallowed halls of the Senate. Nakita natin yung mga personalities na ipinaglaban. The father of Senator Coco Pimentel, who fought against injustice and the martial law days, and many others who were jailed and fought for what they believed in and lost their power, fighting for our country and for our nation and for our democratic processes. Huwag natin sampalin sila, na makalimutan natin ang kanilang alaala, kanilang memories. No, we forget their memories because of pure personal ambition. That's why I salute all of you. I salute all of you. It is now a test of character. This, gentlemen, is a test of character. Separates the boys from the men. Those who want the toys and those who want to fight for our country. So kayong lahat, mabuhay po kayo. So yesterday, my dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, may I ask them to please first calm down and take your seats and settle down there in the back. We'll be discussing very important matters. Thank you, my dear colleagues. My dear friends, ating mga kababayan, my dear colleagues, yesterday we had a caucus which lasted 3 hours long to discuss the current events that are happening in Philippine politics, particularly on the issue of this People's Initiative. If I may be allowed to read the statement of the Senate on the People's Initiative. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. It is an enduring symbol of our democracy, enshrining the foundation of our nationhood and reflecting the consensus of our citizenry. We respect and recognize the people as our sovereign, with the right to call for constitutional amendments. We must, however, guard against any sinister and underhanded attempt to change the Constitution by exploiting our democratic process under the guise of a People's Initiative. This so-called People's Initiative proposes only one change. In acting as a constituent assembly, the Senate and the House shall vote jointly. While it seems simple, my dear friends, the goal is apparent: to make it easier to revise the Constitution by eliminating the Senate from the equation. It is an obvious prelude to further amendments, revisions, or even an overhaul of our entire Constitution. If this PI prospers, further changes to the Constitution can be done with or without the Senate's approval, or worse, even absent all the senators. Should Congress vote jointly in a constituent assembly, the Senate, with its 24 members, cannot pass any meaningful vote against 316 members of the House of Representatives. This singular and seemingly innocuous change in the Constitution will open the floodgates to a wave of amendments and revisions that will erode the nation as we know it. To allow joint voting will destroy the delicate balance between which our hard-won democracy rests. It will change, or destabilize rather, the principle of bicameralism in our system of checks and balances. With this change, the Senate is left powerless to stop even the most radical of proposals. We cannot protect our lands from foreign ownership. We cannot stop the removal of term limits, nor no election scenario in 2025 or worse, in 2028. It is ridiculous that the Senate, as a co-equal chamber of the House, which is needed to pass even local bills, will have a dispensable and diluted role in charter change, the most monumental act of policymaking concerning the highest law of the land. Throughout Philippine history, the Senate has always been one of the first targets by those who seek to undermine our country's democracy. Today, the Senate once again stands as a bastion of democracy, as it rejects this brazen attempt to violate the Constitution, the country, and our people. This Senate of the people will not allow itself to be silenced. Signed, yours truly, Senate President Juan Miguel Zubiri, Senate President Pro Tem Lauren Legarda, Senate Majority Floor Leader Joel Villanueva, Minority Floor Leader Senator Calino Coco Pimentel, Senators Joseph Victor Ejercito, Mark Villar, Lisa Hontiveros, Sani Angara, Maria Lourdes Nancy Binay, Alan Peter Cayetano, Pia Cayetano, Ronald Bato de la Rosa, Francis G. Escudero, Jingoy Estrada, Sherwin Gatchalian, Christopher Lawrence Go, Manuel Lito Lapid, Jaime Romualdez Marcos, Grace Poe, Bong Revilla, Francis Tol Tolentino, Rafi Tulfo, Cynthia Villar, and last but not the least, my dear colleague and friend and advocate for charter change, Robin Hood Padilla. And I'd like to add in the signature